I woke up one morning to find a 10-foot metal fence cutting straight through my backyard like some government border. Not just across the grass, mind you, but slicing directly between my patio and the lake I'd fished from for over 15 years. It had a locked gate, a giant HOA members-only sign, and, cherry on top, a laminated printout of a new community shoreline usage policy, duct taped to the bars. It looked like someone had raided a Home Depot at midnight and gone full prison architect while I was sleeping. I thought I was hallucinating until my neighbor Doug stormed over in nothing but SpongeBob pajama pants and a robe, yelling something about trespassing and a lakefront land grab. To be clear, I own my house, my lot, and the entire 100 feet of shoreline behind it, fair and square. It was one of the reasons I bought the place back in 2007. It was the quiet end of the lake, away from the marina noise, with clean water, mature trees, and loons that sang in the morning. That view? Worth every penny. So when I saw that monstrous fence dissecting it like some HOA Berlin Wall, I thought maybe the city was doing emergency work or something. But no. It wasn't the city. It wasn't the state. It was Karen and her army of clipboard-wielding HOA cronies. Karen is the HOA president. Early 50s, aggressively tanned, always wearing tennis skirts despite having never held a racket. She walks like she owns the earth, talks like she's narrating a soap opera, and treats rules the way raccoons treat trash lid. She's also the kind of woman who files police reports over lawn gnomes and tries to ban wind chimes because they're audibly aggressive. So it should have been no surprise when she called an emergency HOA meeting that evening and smugly announced that, after an extensive boundary reassessment, the lakefront behind my house was now recognized as communal property shared by the Lakeside Pines HOA. Doug almost had a stroke. I swear the vein on his forehead tried to pack its bags and escape his skull. "You can't just steal our shoreline," he shouted. "You're not a queen, Karen." Karen blinked like he'd spoken in Whale. Actually, per subsection D of the revised boundary covenants, it's well within our jurisdiction to reclaim and protect lakefront access for the benefit of the majority. Then she flashed a smug little grin and added, "Besides, those fences are already in place. It's done." I just sat back and watched. I've found the best way to handle people like Karen is to let them run their mouths and tie the rope themselves. Everyone else in the room erupted. There were threats, curse words, demands for lawyers. Someone threw a cup of decaf. Karen banged a decorative gavel she brought from home and adjourned the meeting, while 3 board members in matching pastel sweaters applauded like cultists. When I got home, I poured a glass of bourbon and called a land surveyor. The next few days were a whirlwind of absurdity. I learned that Karen and her crew had updated the HOA's maps, citing a decades-old clerical error that they claimed proved the shoreline was common property. They used it to file a corrected plat with the county, a move so bold and shady it was almost impressive. The kicker? They somehow convinced the zoning office that it was a minor revision, meaning no public notice, no hearing, no input from homeowners. Just a silent theft with a paper trail and a padlock. I wasn't the only one affected. 3 other homeowners got their lakefronts cut in half. One guy's kayak rack was now technically on HOA land. A retiree named Marge had a boathouse that was sealed shut behind the new fence. People were livid. Karen doubled down. She posted signs calling us aggressors, claimed the HOA was protecting the lake from irresponsible personal misuse, and even held a ribbon-cutting ceremony at the fence. There were balloons. I wish I was joking. She invited the local news and posed next to the sign, giving a speech about communal harmony, while completely ignoring the fact that she'd just hijacked thousands of dollars in property value from private citizens. I watched the segment air while eating nachos and writing down the name of the news anchor. I had a plan, but I needed proof, leverage, and something big. A few days later, I had it. The surveyor came back with the original plats, signed and sealed. According to the official county archive, not Karen's glitter-glued fantasy map, my property line extended 15 feet past the fence, right into the water. Not only that, but I found two glaring discrepancies in the HOA's corrected filing. 1. It lacked notarized homeowner consent forms, and 2. It misrepresented the shoreline markers. It was fraud, plain and simple. But I didn't want to win with a lawsuit. That would take months. I wanted something bigger, quieter, strategic. So I called a real estate attorney I trusted and asked one simple question. Who owns the dam at the east end of the lake? There was a pause. Then she said, "Funny you ask. It just went up for auction." And that's when everything changed. The dam wasn't much to look at, just a concrete slope with a rusting control gate and a small maintenance shed. But what it lacked in charm, it more than made up for in power. Quite literally. It controlled the entire water level of the lake, from peak summer high tide to the low basin line during drought season. I hadn't paid much attention to it before. Like most people, I assumed it was managed by the county or maybe a conservation trust. But no. Turns out it had been owned for decades by a crusty old guy named Mel who inherited it from his even crustier father and hadn't done anything with it since the late 80s. The property was considered non-essential utility infrastructure, private, technically commercial, and just obscure enough that it flew under everyone's radar, including, miraculously, Karen's. When I heard it was up for auction due to unpaid taxes and deferred maintenance violations, I nearly dropped my phone. I asked the lawyer if it was possible to purchase it anonymously. "Totally," she said. "You'll need to set up an LLC. Keep your name off any visible paperwork. I know a guy." Within 48 hours, Stillwater Holdings LLC was born. And 3 days after that, I was the proud, silent owner of a dam that every boat-loving resident on the lake relied on but had no clue was now in the hands of the guy they just fenced out of his backyard. It was hard not to gloat. But I did my best. I didn't tell Doug. I didn't tell Marge. I especially didn't tell Karen, who was too busy posting triumphant HOA newsletters about restoring public control over shoreline assets. The arrogance was astonishing. She announced new HOA lakefront access permits, with an annual fee and a waiting list. She introduced boat dock proposals and was even caught sketching ideas for a lakefront clubhouse. The woman was building a kingdom on stolen shoreline, and I now owned the water she thought gave her power. I started quietly assembling my team. I hired an independent hydrologist to inspect the dam for potential restoration and safety retrofitting. It was the kind of technical jargon that makes bureaucrats look the other way. I got permits approved to perform structural maintenance drainage, a process that involved temporarily lowering the lake's water level to examine the dam's concrete integrity. All legal, all dry, all devastating if executed at just the right moment. Timing was everything. I didn't want a revenge explosion. I wanted a silent takedown that ended with Karen standing in 2 feet of mud, surrounded by deflated kayaks and broken dreams. I scheduled the inspection for a Monday in early June, right after the HOA launched its new Premium Lake Access Pass program. Karen had started selling memberships to non-residents. For $500 a season, you could use the dock, paddle a community kayak, and enjoy the serenity of nature. She held a grand opening barbecue with a jazz band. I showed up just long enough to sip a soda and pretend to read the bulletin board while making mental note. Her smugness was radiant. She told some poor visitor, "We restored this shoreline for the people. We took it back from neglect." I had to turn away to keep from laughing. She was so high on her own ego she couldn't smell the storm coming. 2 weeks before the planned water drop, I received an email from the county's Water Resources Division. It said, "Approved for partial drawdown at your discretion under permit #6742B. That was my green light. All I had to do was wait, and let Karen dig herself in deeper. The following weekend, I got word that the HOA had voted to install a floating dock. Not just any dock, this thing was massive. 40 feet long, 2 sun decks, custom bumpers for rented paddle boats, even plans for future lighting. Karen was already emailing vendors about string lights and a potential 4th of July fireworks event on our pristine community lake. I couldn't have scripted it better. She was decorating the stage just in time for the floor to vanish. I held a final inspection with my hydrologist, who confirmed the drop would take roughly 24 hours and lower the waterline by nearly 4 feet. That would render the new dock completely useless and leave most boats sitting on dry lakebed. He asked if I wanted to proceed. I simply said, set the date. Monday, 4 a.m. The day before the drain, I walked the lakefront one last time. Kids were skipping rock. Families were loading coolers into pontoon boat. Karen was taking selfies on the dock with her dog and a parasol. She had no idea. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by my window, watching the moonlight shimmer on the water, sipping bourbon like a man about to pull the biggest passive-aggressive heist in HOA history. At precisely 4 a.m., the sluice gate opened with a low, echoing groan. Water began to pour out of the reservoir like a silent protest. I stood inside the control shed, watching the gauges and flow meters tick downward. It felt like justice dripping out 1 gallon at a time. The sun hadn't even risen when I drove home and made myself pancakes. I ate them in silence, savoring every bite like it was dipped in schadenfreude syrup. By 10 a.m., the panic had started. Doug called me first. Have you seen the lake? It's dropping fast. What the hell's going on? Is this some kind of dam problem? I shrugged. Maybe it's maintenance. These things happen. Karen sent out a mass email. Attention! Lake levels are experiencing unexpected fluctuations. The HOA is investigating and will issue updates shortly. At noon, she posted a frantic video standing on the dock, which now hovered awkwardly above a shrinking puddle. Her voice cracked as she declared a possible sabotage situation and said she was contacting authorities. That was my cue. Using a throwaway Gmail account tied to the LLC, I sent a scanned copy of the county-approved drawdown permit to the HOA board. Subject line: Notice of scheduled maintenance by property owner. 2 hours later, chaos erupted. Karen went live on Facebook in full meltdown mode. This is an attack on our community. We demand to know who owns the dam. The best part? She couldn't find out. LLCs in this state are shielded from public identity disclosures. She couldn't even sue me unless she figured out who I was, and by the time she did, her entire kingdom would be buried in lakebed muck. That night, I walked the now exposed shoreline, boots crunching over dried mud and weed. Boats tilted sideways on cracked earth. The floating dock listed pathetically to one side, its party deck scraping bottom. Karen sat in a lawn chair next to the fence she'd installed, holding a wine glass like it could somehow protect her from collapse. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did. But I didn't stop. I just kept walking. Quiet, calm, patient. Like the lake had been before I drained it. I thought draining the lake would feel like the grand finale, the mic drop. But it was just the intermission. The real show began afterward, when Karen tried to claw her way out of the disaster she'd created, only to dig herself in deeper with every entitled flail. While the rest of the neighborhood was freaking out over dead fish and stranded paddle boats, I was quietly finalizing my long game. I wasn't done. Not until every inch of my shoreline was back, legally and permanently, and every brick of her fake authority was ground into dust. The morning after the water dropped, I met with my lawyer over breakfast. She had a manila folder thick enough to double as a weapon. Inside were documents that outlined everything Karen and the HOA had done wrong, from the forged plat map to the bogus homeowner signatures to the unauthorized fence construction on private land. And just for fun, a list of municipal code violations they'd racked up with the new dock. Built without permits, with materials that weren't even rated for aquatic use. Turns out Karen's builder was her sister's ex-boyfriend, who normally installed hot tubs. While my lawyer prepared the case for potential civil litigation, I turned my attention to the press. It didn't take much to get a reporter interested. I emailed a local station an anonymous tip about a rogue HOA stealing private lakefront through fraudulent filings, then watching helplessly as the lake is legally drained by its new owner. They replied within an hour. The next morning, a reporter named Trina showed up with a cameraman. I met them at the dam, still posing as a representative of Stillwater Holdings LLC. I gave them the tour, showed them the permits, explained the drawdown. When Trina asked why the lake was being drained now of all times, I smiled and said, "Sometimes things just reach a breaking point." The story aired that evening under the headline, "Lakefront Power Struggle. HOA Land Grab Ends in Waterless Wake." The footage of Karen ranting in front of her sunken dock, paired with crisp shots of my permit and the legally owned dam, made for a beautiful juxtaposition. Comments poured in. Supportive neighbors started asking questions. And then the bomb dropped. The county launched a formal investigation into the HOA's land filings. At the emergency HOA meeting held in Karen's driveway, because the community center had flooded during a recent storm she forgot to budget roof repairs for, she tried to spin the whole thing. "We were misled by poor records," she claimed, waving a manila folder of her own that probably held nothing but blank paper and expired coupons. "Our only goal was to bring the community together." She looked directly at Marge while saying that, as if Marge had forgotten being locked out of her own boathouse. Doug stood next to me, arms crossed. "She's cooked," he muttered. "She just doesn't know it yet." But she started to figure it out a few days later, when the county clerk's office publicly rescinded her revised plat map due to procedural irregularities. That was their polite way of saying forgery. With her legal foundation crumbling, Karen did what all cornered Karens do: she doubled down. She called an emergency vote to amend the HOA bylaws, giving the board temporary emergency powers over shared lake infrastructure. Only problem? There was no shared lake infrastructure anymore. Just a dry pit and a stack of lawsuits on the horizon. Meanwhile, I was preparing my endgame. Once the water level reached its planned minimum, I submitted a secondary permit for maintenance reinforcement, this time including partial restoration of water levels, contingent on resolving shoreline property dispute. That language was important. It put the pressure on the HOA. If they wanted their lake back, they'd have to give my land back first. I was offering the lake as ransom, and they knew it. The next board meeting was a nightmare circus. I didn't attend, obviously, but Doug did. He recorded the whole thing. Karen tried to pass a motion declaring the dam a community hazard, and demanded the county seize it under eminent domain. The motion failed. Badly. Turns out, trying to take someone's private dam without understanding the law is not a good look. Especially when the owner has every permit in order and the media already sniffing around. I watched the footage over popcorn. "Karen, we can't let this rogue LLC hold us hostage." HOA member number 2, "But you took his property first." Karen, "Irrelevant. This is about unity." HOA member number 3, "Unity? You forged documents." Karen, "That's alleged." The HOA started to fracture. One board member resigned. Another admitted he'd been misled and thought Karen had received homeowner consent. A vote was called to suspend Karen as president until the investigation concluded. It failed by one vote, but the writing was on the wall. She was unraveling faster than the lake's fish population. Then came the lawsuit. Marge, who'd been keeping receipts since the moment her boathouse was fenced off, filed a civil complaint for property damages and loss of use. Doug joined in. So did another homeowner. My lawyer added me to the list. Our joint suit hit the HOA with claims totaling over $300,000. Karen called it frivolous. The HOA's insurance disagreed and dropped them. Suddenly, the community wasn't just angry. They were broke and angry. The final blow came from the county itself. After completing its investigation, the planning department issued a public statement confirming the HOA had submitted falsified property lines and improperly claimed private land as communal. The clerk reinstated the original plats. Our properties were restored. Karen's fence? Ordered removed within 15 days or face daily fines. I could have left it at that. But no. I wanted Karen to feel it. So I hosted a lakefront Independence Day barbecue on my legally reclaimed shoreline. I invited everyone except her. Doug brought fireworks. Marge brought margaritas. We grilled, laughed, and celebrated like we'd just overthrown a dictator. Which, in a way, we had. Halfway through the evening, Karen drove by. Slowly. Her car paused near my driveway. She didn't get out. Just watched from behind her windshield like a ghost haunting the house she lost. I raised my drink in a silent toast. She drove off. The next morning, I began refilling the lake. The sound of the dam gates closing was anticlimactic, just a hollow metallic clunk echoing off concrete. But the effect? Oh, the effect was magnificent. By midday, the water had begun to trickle back into the basin, slowly licking the muddy shores like a dog returning to its bowl after a long sulk. I stood at the edge, sipping my coffee and watching as the reflections reappeared, the lake slowly reclaiming itself from the bruised silence. It was poetic. It was calculated. And it was all under my control. I'd filed the restoration paperwork the same day the county issued their ruling reinstating my property line. The language was simple and boring. Engineer speak for, "We're done now. The lake's coming back." I added a note at the end. Lake levels will return as disputes are resolved in full. Which was code for, Karen, until that fence is gone, we're still in the drought. Sure enough, on the 15th day, precisely when the county fines would kick in, Karen's fence vanished overnight. No press release. No apology. Just gone. Like a fever dream with aluminum posts. Word got around fast. Suddenly I was a hero. Neighbors waved from porches. A few even dropped off thank you cards and baked goods. Marge gave me homemade peach cobbler with a note that said, "Next time you buy something critical to the survival of our ecosystem, tell me. I'll bake you too." Doug stopped by with a bottle of scotch and a grin so wide it looked like he'd just won a lottery. "You're a legend," he said. "An actual legend. Do you know Karen tried to get me to co-sign a new fence plan just 3 weeks ago? Called it a community reintegration initiative." He rolled his eyes. "She's still spinning." Karen, of course, didn't take her public shaming quietly. She tried to salvage her legacy with a barrage of performative gestures. She issued a newsletter about new collaborative approaches to HOA governance. She announced a community listening tour, which consisted of her awkwardly standing in front of the grocery store for 2 hours while everyone avoided eye contact. Her biggest move, though, was pure desperation. She threw herself a retirement party. You read that right. She didn't resign. She retired. Complete with banners, a catered spread from Olive Garden, and a slideshow of photos from her years of service, which mostly consisted of screenshots from Facebook and blurry pictures of her cutting ribbons in front of things she didn't build. No one really clapped. Doug went, just for the meatballs, and told me Karen gave a 10-minute speech about weathering coordinated attacks on community values. I watched the video later. She didn't mention me by name. She didn't have to. Her voice cracked somewhere between the phrase grassroots sabotage and fake landowners. 2 weeks later, the lake was nearly full again. The fish were coming back. The docks, what was left of them, sat lopsided but afloat. I knew I'd eventually rebuild mine, maybe even improve it, but I waited. Letting the wreckage linger a little longer seemed fitting. Like leaving up crime scene tape after the bodies are gone. A quiet reminder of what happens when hubris meets hydraulic. Then came the real twist. The moment I didn't plan for. The one that took even me by surprise. The HOA collapsed. Not immediately. Not loudly. But slowly, like a tower of Jenga blocks with half its base removed. After Karen's retirement, the remaining board members couldn't agree on anything. One wanted to keep the access pass system going. Another wanted to abolish all lake rules and let people jet ski at night. Meetings devolved into chaos. People quit. People yelled. Dues weren't collected. Vendors stopped returning calls. One of the new board members, a guy named Rick who wore golf polos to everything, accidentally sent out an email that included Karen's original fake plat map. To everyone, including the county. That triggered a second investigation. This time, it wasn't just about the shoreline, it was about the HOA's financials. Turns out, Karen had been skimming. Nothing massive. Just enough to fund her obsession with floral-printed stationery and catered event. But it was enough. Enough for an audit. Enough for angry residents to demand a full dissolution vote. I got the letter in the mail on a Tuesday. Petition to disband the Lakeside Pines HOA. It needed 60% of homeowners to sign. Within a week, they had 78%. Just like that, it was over. No more HOA. No more Karen. No more pastel newsletter with tips on how to edge your lawn. The community elected a small committee to manage basic maintenance. A few folks with actual skills and zero interest in power. They asked me to join. I declined. I said I was better suited for quiet revenge than community budgeting. They laughed and agreed. As for Karen? She moved. Or maybe fled. Her house went up for sale not long after the audit. The listing described it as a charming lake-adjacent home with great potential. The irony nearly choked me. When it finally sold, the new owners showed up with kayaks and a golden retriever. Nice couple. Real friendly. They asked about the dam, if it ever caused flooding. I smiled and said, only when it needs to teach someone a lesson. And then, one lazy Sunday afternoon, I sat on my rebuilt dock. No permits, no rules, no HOA, and watched the sun dip below the trees. The lake was calm again. No fences. No drama. Just ripples and wind and the occasional duck. Doug paddled by and gave me a salute. I raised my glass in return. Not just to him. To all of it. The fight. The patience. The planning. The sweet, sweet satisfaction of watching justice unfold in slow, deliberate waves. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about reclaiming what was mine. About proving that no matter how loud someone shouts, no matter how many newsletters they print or fences they build, the truth has weight. It may take time, but it drops like water behind a dam, quiet, steady, unstoppable. And in the end, when the pressure gets too high, it breaks. It took months before the last of the HOA's damage was cleaned up, but I didn't mind. Watching their mess slowly disappear, one sunken dock post at a time, was therapeutic. In a way, the lake healed in perfect sync with the neighborhood. A little muddy at first, filled with flailing and confusion, but slowly settling back into peace once the storm passed. And I just watched it all with my feet in the water and a satisfied smile buried beneath every sip of bourbon. Karen's house sat empty for a while after she left. Word spread fast that the former HOA tyrant had been quietly booted from the neighborhood through a mix of shame and legal consequence. Some said she'd moved to Florida to start over, which made sense. It sounded like the kind of place where she'd find a new HOA to terrorize. Before the for sale sign came down, people would walk by her old place just to gawk. It had become a local landmark, like a ghost of bad decisions. Someone even spray-painted the sidewalk in front of it with the words, "No rulers here," in chalk. I watched a group of teenagers take selfies beside it. For once, the youth were doing something useful. Meanwhile, Lakeside Pines had never been quieter. No more threats about mailbox colors. No anonymous letters about grass length. No pastel flyers demanding $10 for a neighborhood newsletter no one read. Just people existing again. People living. We started having informal block parties, where everyone brought something, and no one judged your potato salad. Marge became the unofficial dock monitor, which really just meant she handed out lemonade and told stories about the time she threatened to whack Karen with an oar. I think she was only half kidding. One evening in late August, I was walking the shoreline with Doug, watching the sunset burn gold across the water, when he turned to me and said, You know what gets me? You never yelled, never made a scene, just smiled and nuked her kingdom from orbit. I shrugged. People like Karen thrive on noise. I just made sure she couldn't hear herself anymore. He laughed. Still can't believe you bought the dam. Technically Stillwater Holdings did, I replied with a grin. Doug nodded thoughtfully, then added, You ever gonna tell anyone it was you? I shook my head. Why ruin the legend? And that was the truth. There was something beautiful in staying anonymous, in letting the myth of the mysterious lake draining LLC grow. People started whispering about it like it was folklore. Did you hear the dam was bought by a tech billionaire who wanted peace? I heard it was a nature preservation group. My cousin says it's owned by the mafia. I encouraged all of it, even bought a black pickup truck just to drive around once a week looking mysterious. But justice wasn't just about draining a lake or dismantling a regime. There were still loose ends to tie up. The lawsuits we'd filed against the HOA were still pending, but once they dissolved, the responsibility fell squarely on Karen's shoulders. Her name was on every fraudulent document. She'd signed off on every scheme. So when the judge handed down the decision, ordering her to pay restitution to all affected homeowners, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Not for her. No, Karen got what she earned. I felt sad for the idea of community that she'd warped and weaponized. An HOA, in theory, should help people, keep things clean, maintain shared spaces. But she'd turned it into a throne, built rules like walls, used power to isolate rather than unify. That was the real crime. The lake wasn't just a body of water, it was a mirror. And under her reign, it had turned stagnant. I took the restitution money and donated my portion to a local conservation group that stocked lakes with fish and taught kids how to kayak. A few weeks later, a group of middle schoolers in neon life jackets launched from the shore in wobbly tandem canoes. I stood under a tree and watched them laugh and splash and scream about minnows. Not a single fence in sight. Then came the final epilogue, because every good story needs one last twist. One chilly October morning, I got a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm in another state. Inside was a short, typed message. Our client, formerly the HOA president of Lakeside Pines, wishes to extend an offer for a private settlement regarding any remaining civil claims. The client requests confidentiality and closure. Attached was a check. Not huge, but not small either. Enough for a few years of bourbon and a replacement boat. I stared at it for a long while. Not because I was shocked. Frankly, I expected it, but because of what it symbolized. Karen, the woman who once called my hummingbird feeder a visual nuisance, was now paying me to forget she existed. I cashed it, and I bought something unexpected. A floating platform just big enough for 2 chairs, a cooler, and a Bluetooth speaker. I anchored it at the center of the lake with a long rope, far enough from shore to feel like I'd left the world behind. Doug helped me haul it out one Saturday, and by sunset we were stretched out in beach chairs, passing a bottle between us as the stars came out one by one. You know, he said, if someone told me a year ago I'd be drinking whiskey in the middle of a lake that used to be a war zone, I'd have laughed in their face. Same, I said. But here we are. We sat in silence for a while, letting the water ripple around us. I ever tell you about the time Karen tried to ban wind? He asked suddenly. I choked on my drink. Wind. She called it unregulated atmospheric disturbance in a memo. Wanted to plant trees as natural wind barriers to reduce what she called air noise. That broke me. I laughed so hard I almost fell off the platform. For a moment it felt like all the stress, all the paperwork, all the stupid meetings and secret permits and forged plats had been worth it, just for that image of Karen trying to ban the breeze. Eventually, we drifted back to shore. As I tied up the boat, I looked over the lake one more time. Calm. Quiet. Owned not by anyone in particular, but by everyone who respected it. The next day, I removed the last remnants of the fence from my yard. One final post had been left behind, half buried in dirt. I dug it up, cleaned it off, and mounted it in the garage. A trophy. A reminder. And next to it, I hung a hand-carved sign that read, "Respect the lake, or watch it disappear." And that, my friends, is how Karen tried to steal my lakefront and ended up drowning in her own entitlement. Never underestimate the power of patience, the beauty of silence, or the utility of owning a very strategic piece of concrete. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's slow, surgical, and soaked in lake water.